Hello everyone, welcome back to Force Strategy Gaming. Today we're going to be taking a look at a Terran strategy. This is actually going to be a very strong Marine Hellion with one medevac push, the goal being to F up your opponent's economy, basically. Now this is going to be against a Protoss opponent. We can see right here, Sock is the Protoss opponent over here. We've got Thorzane as the Terran player that we're going to be taking a look at. So the main goal in this push is going to be, as mentioned, hurt the economy. You really are attempting to take out as many workers as possible, and if your Protoss opponent has expanded as well, you're trying to drop that as well. And this push is going to be effective for multiple reasons. Now, even if they're bunkering up in their main, you're moving out with a single medevac as well. This allows you the versatility to be able to drop in their main base if deemed necessary. We can see right now, early on, Thorzane did move out with that SCV scout, checking the corner of his base and checking any likely proxy positions. And that's certainly a good idea early on in the game. Make sure that your Protoss opponent isn't trying to do anything fancy like a proxy gate or anything like that. So starting off with that initial Marine, then getting that reactor right on that rack. Moving up into the main, he is seeing pretty standard stuff. He wants to check for that second gas. Seeing that lack of second gas is a tip off to a likely early expand. There's two types of early expands. Sometimes you see one gate expand, but you also see the 3 gate expand Sentry Heavy. Now with the 3 gate expand, you would expect a second assimilator there, but since that's not there, not likely to be what he's ending up going for. Much more likely that he's trying for some sort of 1 gate expand build. And that's obviously something you would want to move out with secondary scouts to check. He doesn't end up doing that. We can see he's back in his main base, but still not a bad idea to maybe tuck your SCV back here or somewhere over here if you want to be super safe, and then move him in a minute or two to check that expansion, just to confirm. Now I'm going to slow it on down because we are going to talk about this opening build order. Build order is going to look as follows, starting off with that 10 depot, then it is a 12 barracks and 13 refinery, then 16 orbital command. Pretty standard opener. Now after your first Marine, you're going to be putting a reactor on that initial barracks. That's a 16 supply. 19 supply, that factory starts building. 26 supplies when the factory finishes, and you're actually going to do a hot swap, put the factory on the reactor that was built on your first barracks, and then build a second reactor on your barracks since the factory is taking up the first one. At this point, you are pumping up a double Hellions and double Marines. 32 supply, you start building your Starport. And then as soon as that finishes, you get a medevac. Now what's going to happen is, as you can see, there will be no upgrades as Marines are basic, and these Hellions don't have blue flame or anything, but you have a massive early force, and that's the whole idea here. You're going to be pushing out the second that medevac finishes. You're moving out with your Marines as well as those Hellions. Now that bunker up front, the whole point of that was to deal with any possible early game stalker push. Were there early stalkers, that would have helped you because with just Marines and Hellions, you have a hard time against that. Very important to note what Thorzane's doing here, pushing out with those Marines in front and keeping those Hellions hidden in the back. If your opponent has any stray units or any scouting units, you want to try to hide those Hellions as much as possible. Unfortunately, an observer did just go by, so that did manage to scout them, but still. Alright, so going to pause at this point. Now, again, the point of this push is you haven't invested any resources. If you get Stimpack or Blue Flame, that cost a lot of resources. Instead of getting those upgrades, we're sticking with those base units, so we have a large amount of them, and that's the whole benefit of this push. Obviously, being Hellion heavy, during the engagement, you need to focus down any light units. You can see Sock here sitting very light unit heavy. With that 1 gate expand build, that's pretty much going to be the case. So Sock, without a lot of stalkers, this is why Thorzane's choosing to engage this force right here with these Hellions. Were there a lot of stalkers here, these Hellions would be avoiding the main force for the most part, and they would kind of be going straight for that econ. But let me pick it back up. We're going to play it here. With a lot of light units, those sentries and those zealots, feel free to engage with your Hellions, and then use the Marines to mop up everything else. Now from this point, Thorzane's going to be using the Marines to take out the Expo, and then walking right up into the main, and look at how much damage these Hellions can do. This is just absolutely devastating, especially since you push out with such a large amount of Hellions. You're pushing out with around 8 Hellions during your initial push. That's about how many you'll have when that medevac does finish. And even if he kills off a bunch of them, you're still going to manage to do a ton of damage. On top of that, look at this, the Marines managing to take out the expansion as well. And that's, I mean, at this point in the game, Thorzane's more or less won. He's destroyed Sock's economy, and he's taking out the Expo. And that just goes to show you how very powerful this push can be. Something else very important to note is that during that big engagement that we saw, you want to take out those sentries pretty much first thing. The last thing that you need is to deal with force fields. So those Hellions and those Marines do want to try to target fire down those sentries, get rid of the Guardian shields and any possible force fields, and then that's going to allow you to freely move around with your Hellions and hurt the econ as we saw there. So from this point, what's going to happen is we are just going to see a transition. During that push, as you can see, Thorazane came out with that expo to defend against any sort of counter push, coming out with these 2 bunkers as well, and then preparing for that transition into bio heavy. We can see right now coming out with those additional racks, and now just filling up those bunkers, and even coming out with 1 more just in case. Also has some scouting Hellions over here. That's definitely not a bad idea either. So there was a counter push, but because of all those bunkers, not a problem. You really do rely on those bunkers, especially since with this push you don't have those upgrades. You lack stim pack or combat shield this early on. Those bunkers are going to be what allows you to defend against any sort of counter aggression like this, because Marines do have a hard time against Stalkers without stim pack, and especially without combat shield. They're just not able to catch up without that stim pack, and without combat shield they die much easier. We can also see right now coming out the missile turret just in case any DT harass tries to go through, also of course dealing with that observer. But after that initial push, again, as you saw, he had done so much damage. It's going to be very difficult for the Protoss opponent to come back from something like that if you do damage anywhere near what Thorazane did in this particular game. So the transition will be bio heavy, get your upgrades, stim pack, combat shield, concussive shell, start to go with the double medevac as well. Really no need for your factory after that initial Hellion push. You don't really want to keep up Hellion production. Switching to bio heavy will be smart. It's kind of the bread and butter Terran versus Protoss build. So you get up your economy, you work on that expansion, and then a good idea is just move out with a timing push, and we can see this is going to be a stim timing push. Thorazane's going to make sure that he is arriving at Sock's base the second that stim pack is done, so that he can try to maximize the amount of damage he does with this early upgrade. So there we go, stim pack just about finished, and now that it is, he's going to activate it and pretty much have no problem mopping up Sock's units. And given the vast amount of economic damage Sock took early game, that's a large part of the reason why he just didn't have forces anywhere near what he needed to defend against this push. So there you go, guys. Let me wrap things up here with that build order. Once more, it was 10 depot, 12 racks, 13 refinery, 16 orbital command, all very standard things. First Marine finishes, get a reactor on that initial barracks. Now at 19 supply, it's going to be your factory. Once that finishes, that'll be at about 26 supply. Lift off the factory, drop it on the reactor that was built on the racks, and then build another reactor on that racks. So you'll have a reactor and a factory, both with barracks, but you want to switch with that factory right away so you can start churning out those mass amount of Hellions again, because you want to be around 8 Hellions when you push out. 32 supplies when that Starport started building. That finishes, you get your medevac, and then you push out. You've got mass Marine and mass Hellion. Remember, a big goal is going to be to take out any sentries. Force fields will hurt you in this push without stim pack and without blue flame. You certainly need to get rid of those sentries as fast as possible. And then you saw how much damage Thorazane was able to do. He really messed up the economy at the expansion, was able to waltz right up in the main. Since he had so many Hellions, and since he took out those sentries, he didn't have to contend with any force fields. That allowed him to walk up into the main and to hurt the economy there. And then the Marines also took out the expansion. I mean, it was almost at that point that Thorazane won the game, but you never want to get too overconfident. During the push, expanding always a good idea. That's what we saw Thorazane do here. Then he made his transition into bio-heavy, Marine Marauder, getting stim pack, combat shield, and concussive shell, also churning out those double medevacs, and then pushing out with a stim timing push. And you want to move out right when that finishes so you can, again, maximize the amount of damage that it is able to do. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you have enjoyed this Terran strategy video. As always, if you like the content, please subscribe. Thanks again, guys. Keep watching and keep owning.